There's a massive spider on the window. Hello Crawl Bros and gals, and welcome back to Crawl Bros Miniatures. I'm Luz, and today I want to take you through how I've built this resin model from Forge World. It's the colossal squig. Look how good it looks! Before we start, there's just a couple of things that I want to point out. This is the first resin model that I've ever put together. I've never worked with resin before, I've only ever used plastic. It was a little bit of a challenge, I'm not gonna lie. I don't think resin is something for a complete beginner. If you've never built models before, I don't think a resin model is a good start because the amount of work involved in it, there's so much sort of shaping and sanding and filling, and there's a lot of patience involved in it. Plus you just need way more tools than what you would normally need for just a standard plastic model. So because I've never worked in resin before, I thought it'd be a really good idea to actually just take you through all the kind of problems that I've had while assembling this and how I've come up with solutions to fix things and just the sort of general frustrations. So you can just get a full picture of what it's like if you've never done a resin model before, like me, rather than just be doing a painting video. So this is going to be part one, it's going to be assembly, and part two is going to be the painting. My first impressions with this were really good. I mean, this is the first resin model that I've had, and the texture I thought was just phenomenal, and it's a really, really cool model to look at. The very, very first thing that you need to do is you need to soak it in some just warm, soapy water, and you've got to scrub it with an old toothbrush. From what I've read, and I've done loads of kind of different research online, resin models have like a film, they have like a chemical residue on them from the molding. And if you don't clean them like this, the paint just doesn't adhere to the resin model. So that's the first thing you need to do, is just give them all a really good clean and dry them as well, dry them properly. And from there, it's just general cleanup. You're chopping off all of those, the resin lines where the resin has been poured into the mold. You are going to need a saw for those larger pieces as well. There's just no way the pliers would cut through them, it's just too thick. I do have to say though, at this point, I'd really started to kind of understand that this was going to be quite difficult to do in terms of shaping and molding. There's a certain piece on the forehead that I'm cutting there that if you just cut it with a knife like that, you've got like a flat oval piece in the forehead. It has to be carved in order for it to blend in with the rest, and I'll show you what I did later to compensate for that. So the next thing I had to fix was the jaw was out of line, so it was too wide, it needed to be brought in. So what I did was I just boiled some water, let it cool for a couple of minutes, dropped the piece in, and once that's nicely heated up, just put it in the tea towel and just squeeze it. I just squeezed it in so that it was in shape, it was in line with the outside. I've seen people use hair dryers and heat guns. I have a heat gun. I didn't want to use it because it gets so hot. I was a little bit concerned about melting the plastic. But I managed to get the jaw into a good line, a good sort of line. But you can see there's gaps where the legs are gonna go. I'm not too concerned about those, I can fill those small gaps in. But what I did pick up was there was a huge gap in the mouth, in the back of the mouth. So what I've done here is I've got some blue tack, because I don't want to glue it at this point. I want to be able to paint it separately, because there's no way you're gonna be able to paint the inside of that jaw effectively. So I noticed there was a huge gap, so I got some Sculpey. I know you can use the green stuff, but this is what I had to hand. So I've got some Sculpey, and I shaped it into the back of the mouth, just squeezed the jaw in, and then carefully pulled the jaw back off so that Sculpey was perfectly in line with the gap that I needed. I then took that out, I baked that so it was nice and hard, glued that in place, and then I carved with the knife, with the lino cutting tools that I'm going to use shortly. I shaped all of that in order to fill the gap effectively, and then put a putty around that. And that's what it looked like after I'd finished. So that's literally just the Sculpey that's been baked to fill in the gap, and then the plastic putty over that in any of the small areas as well. But it really filled that gap in nicely. Now this is where it started to get a little more complex, because there was still an overlap with that jaw. So that jaw's only being held in place by blue tack. It's not securely fastening, but there was still an overlap. Now I'm quite fortunate that I have these lino cutting tools, and they're basically mini chisels, and they're perfect for this. But for someone who doesn't have these tools, it would be quite difficult to shape all of the pieces that you need. I mean, the good thing about the colossal squig is it's a relatively simple model. It's legs and a jaw to put in place, but there's still work that needs to be done. So you can see the little gouge piece that I'm using there, and I'm just carving the resin away so that it all blends into one. Now, if you don't have these lino cutting tools, you can just use the sandpaper and the needle files. I mean, you can use a straightforward nail file. I just think it will take you a lot longer if you have these tools, or if you have the spare money to go and buy one of them. I would recommend it because I think it saved a hell of a lot of time, and they managed to give me a much smoother blend because I could carve both sides and I wasn't sort of having to rigorously sand the area. The only thing I did notice that I'm pointing out there is the further in that you carve into that resin, the more you're risking having bubbles shown, but those can be filled in with the plastic putty. And there I'm using the needle files to just carve in the line. So it's not just a case of smoothing that whole area down, you need it to look like it's a good transition. So I've used the needle file and the sandpaper still to just, move those creases so that it looks like they flow. And then it's just removing the mold line. So there's a mold line at the back. Again, I've used the lino cutting tools, but you could just use the needle files or some sandpaper again. But these lino cutting tools just saved a lot of time. And I think, even with the plastic models, there's always some sort of cleanup to do. You always need to clean the areas where you've cut it off the sprue, or you need to scrub the mold lines off. So, this is sort of the general thing you would do for a normal plastic model anyway. It's just on a bigger scale, not just because the model's bigger, just because the mold itself isn't perfect. Plastic casting is far, far more accurate than resin is. So you'll never get a resin model that's perfect fit. You will always have to do this tweaking. So it does take a lot more time to put together than a plastic one does. But once everything's finished, you can prime the model. I've primed mine with a base coat of grey. I did kind of screw up a little bit here though, because I glued it to the base. I got a little bit eager, and I think it just would have been a lot easier to paint if I hadn't glued it to the base. But I've glued it towards the end of the base because I'm planning on having either a little guy running away or some sort of terrain in the front, but it just would have been a bit easier if I hadn't glued it at this point. So if you're doing yours, I'd definitely glue it once you've finished. So I'm moving on now to painting the inside of the mouth because I need to be able to glue that jaw in place, and I can't glue it until I've painted the inside of the mouth. So I've started off here with Screamer Pink. As always, I'll put pictures of the paints up on screen as I go. So Screamer Pink as the base coat, and I've done that over the whole surface, over the tongue and over the gums as well. What I've done for the next stages for all of the layering is I've used Pink Horror, I've then used Cadian Fleshstone and Kislev Flesh, but what I've done is I've mixed the paints in between those as well. So I've mixed a little bit of Screamer Pink in with a little bit of Pink Horror to create a blend between them. Then I've moved on to the Pink Horror. I've then mixed Pink Horror with Cadian Fleshstone to create a colour in between them before moving on to just Cadian, and then the same for Kislev as well. So it's just giving me more of a smooth transition between those. The tongue for this squig is really well textured. It's got these really nice ridges and bumps on them, so you can use them as a guide. So anything that's sort of dipped down, a little dip in the tongue, keep that darker and do highlights around it, so you're getting this appearance of craters. It's just a shame that I'm putting all of this effort into painting this tongue and it's never really going to be that visible. So this isn't necessary. You don't need to go into this much detail with the tongue if you don't want to, but I just thought it's a good chance to practice flesh tones and things as well. And then the teeth, they're just a base coat of more gas brown. I've then done a wash over them with Ghoul Grunter Fur mixed in with the contrast medium, and then I've just highlighted them with a Shabty Bone as well, and then just a little bit of Screaming Skull. And that's the finished result. But what I have done here is I have a gloss paint. So you just paint it over the area and it dries really, really wet. So it's given the mouth this sort of moist appearance. And once it's all glued in place, that's what it looks like. So I had to do a little bit more sanding and a little bit more filing around the jaw area. I filled in the gaps, but Squiggy Azalea is ready to paint now. It was either Squiggy Azalea or Squiggy Pop. They're both pretty good. I decided on Squiggy Azalea though, because they both have big booties. There you have it. There's the assembled model. I hope that was really useful for you, and you know, you could see some of my frustrations with putting it together. There's definitely some tools that I think you would need that a sort of beginner just wouldn't have. Like the carving tools, like those lino cutting tools. I was quite fortunate that I had those. I suppose the big question is, are resin models worth it? Yeah, I think they are. I mean, don't get me wrong, if Games Workshop did a plastic version of this, I'd definitely get the plastic version first. There's so much work involved with resin, and I think the big problem is you'll never get a resin model that comes out of the box that fits perfectly. You are always going to have to do some sort of shaping, moulding and filling and sanding, all that kind of stuff. It's definitely not for people who've never built models before. You know, if you've never done any model before, I wouldn't recommend you getting this out from the get-go. Having said that, I think the Squig is the perfect model to start off with, because it's just a ball with legs. The only thing that you need to stick on it is the legs and the jaw. That's it. It's assembled. You know, obviously there's shaping and sanding to do, but it's a really good start-off model. And yeah, I think it is worth it because it's limited to Forge World. You know, you can't get these anywhere else. And it's good experience. You know, it's trying something new. It's getting you used to working with different tools, with shaping. So yeah, I think it was worth it in the end. But I hope the video was useful. As I said, please like and subscribe, and look out for part 2 where I'm going to be painting Squiggy Azalea.